Minister, in supporting this bill, I would like in particular to draw attention to the need to ensure that qualifying prisoners released under the terms of the Good Friday Agreement are not discriminated against. We would also include other former political prisoners in this legislation. I was involved in negotiation around prisoners' issues, and the clear commitment then was to ensure that qualifying prisoners under the Good Friday Agreement would be facilitated in their efforts to rebuild their lives outside the prison. The clear understanding was that no barrier would be placed in the way of former prisoners in terms of accessing employment and taking up educational opportunities and so on. Unfortunately, the spirit of that commitment has not been fully adhered to. In general, former Republican prisoners have successfully rebuilt their lives outside the prison, but recently we have seen an attempt to discriminate against former prisoners in relation to employment. I am specifically referring, of course, to the recent legislation governing the issue of taxi licences. We, of course, recognise that certain categories of offenders do need to be excluded from certain types of employment to protect members of the public, but we do not accept that ought to apply across the board. Distinctions should also be made in relation to categories of non-political prisoners. There are quite a number of former Republican prisoners who work as taxi drivers. One of the reasons for that was difficulty in relation to age or qualifications unrelated to have been in prison and securing other employment for such a long period. It is therefore unfair that former political prisoners should be discriminated against in this manner, given that they have often worked for many years as taxi drivers and have not been convicted of any other offence that would or should exclude them from being issued with a licence. My party, and indeed other TDs and senators, made that point in the debate on the taxi legislation, but we were ignored by this government. There is no evidence at all that former political prisoners present a danger to the public who use taxis, and yet they were gratuitously included in the legislation. If the new licensing regulations are adhered to strictly to the letter, it will mean that many former prisoners, political prisoners, will lose their only means of employment. Many are at an age when finding alternative jobs will be difficult, if not impossible, in current circumstances. There is clearly then a need for a measure such as proposed in our bill to ensure that political prisoners qualifying under the Good Friday Agreement, and indeed other political prisoners released prior to that, are given greater protection under the law. Part of the reconciliation process and conflict resolution in the aftermath of the ceasefires and the political agreement which brought an end to the conflict has been the reintegration of former political prisoners from all parties to that conflict. Lately, we have seen attempts to interfere with that process, including the arrest of former prisoners, as well as the exclusion of former political prisoners from both sides of the border from particular jobs. It would appear that certain people are intent on penalising former Republican political prisoners for vindictive reasons. I believe that it is not only vindictive, but is also a retrogressive step and illustrates a certain degree of complacency regarding the conflict resolution process, as well as a breach of the spirit, if not the letter, of the understanding that after 1998, that former political prisoners would not be prevented from enjoying the same rights and opportunities as other citizens. Clearly then, there is a need to ensure that in the future that does not happen, that does not depend on the goodwill or otherwise of whatever party or parties happen to be in power. The only way to ensure that, as with the protection of other sections of society referred to in this bill, is to embody protection in the law. I would hope, therefore, that deputies from across the House will vote for this bill and allow it to go forward to be properly debated and, if necessary, amended to implementing the protection it outlines in law. There are many people who have come through this House who are former political prisoners. And indeed, the Deputy of the Chair, if it was adhered to the letter, as a letter to Republican prisoners, would find himself quite difficultly because of his past association with the National Farmers Association and being in prison for such.